Tim,
Simone,
Gal, you are my first guest, Ocean 15.
this is crazy.
Feels very good. And finally, I see you in person.
First time in person.
Thank you so much, brother. Cheers, man.
Well, thank you for having me. All right.
Listen, so you're probably familiar with the transatlantic format, but you are one of the jury presidents of the 15 categories, and we are here to cross your ocean. I personally believe that everyone is an ocean, and to really get to know somebody, you have to cross the ocean.
Sounds intimate, but I'm ready. It's a little intimidating, but let's do it.
So I'm going to ask you like 7 questions, like the 7 C's. The format is called like the 7 C's interview. I'm going to start with the first one, and we're going to go from there, okay?
Okay.
Good. Okay, Peter Barnsley, the author of the 1974 novel Jaws, had a long-time fascination with sharks, which he frequently encountered while he was like fishing with his father. So he grew up with shark. But the guy was terrified by sharks. Terrified. It didn't matter though. He actually wrote a novel about what it terrified him. So if you look under this perspective, he was able to shift that kind of like negative energy and fear into like a positive energy that became like a creative source. Now I read on your bio, I always get like the word wrong, but I read that you spent 22 years avoiding advertising. So now you have to tell me what made you change and shift that negative energy into like positive and embark in this journey.
This is great. It's a great question. I'm feeling it. Well, I will start on a side note. I have always had a fascination with sharks, and I used to be an avid scuba diver, and I would only seek out shark experiences. So a lot of experience with sharks. Now, definitely not afraid of sharks, but yes, fear of advertising. Why? I'm actually from an advertising family.
I heard that.
Yeah. So my mother is like a notable advertiser. You're probably familiar with Coca-Cola, Mean Joe Green commercial. So
Yeah.
she wrote the spot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she wrote the spot, and she was at McCann in
Right.
1980 or
Right.
whatever, and it's such a notable spot. When I
Right.
was growing up, reporters from Forbes
Right.
and Good Housekeeping and New York Times, they would be coming to the house, and and she was a woman
Right.
who was breaking glass ceilings, and she was going breaking her water in boardrooms
Wow.
that women had not tread foot in prior, and at the same time raising 5 children of her own and 2 from my father's prior marriage. So she was like really considered this icon,
Right.
not just for women but for advertising. And I grew up in the ad agencies, etc. So I always looked at advertising as this thing that was just simply not an option for me because, my mom's done it at the highest level, and she's sort of achieved this the massive height. How could I ever surpass that?
Right.
I would always, if I were to ever
Of
do
course.
that, knowing that I was actually probably naturally inclined towards it, but how would I ever surpass that? I would always live in that shadow, and I was afraid of that shadow.
Is there a date that you can stick to the moment where you realize that I'm not going to be afraid anymore? I'm going to actually take this journey on?
Well,
Is there
no, but I can pin it down somewhat. I followed biology, mathematics, chemistry, biochemistry, and that was my path because things are very cut and dry. They're right or wrong. And I guess I've always feared also the subjective, the judgment.
Right.
You say something and people judge you for it. You can't judge somebody for what's clearly a right answer. So I had gone to a school and studied this. I was working in a laboratory, and I was not good at laboratory work. I was spilling radioactivity everywhere. And I took a portfolio class, and at the same time, I learned that there was this thing called pharma advertising and medical advertising, where they would pay me money because I understood things like data and charts and things like that. So I really just got into advertising as more of a pharma medical technician type of person doing something that I was exceptionally good at. And not good at, I didn't have a great portfolio. I had a couple pictures from portfolio school, and that was about it. So just being able to come into advertising from a side that I was actually quite good at, I think that was it. That was my thing.
And that was a gradual shift.
And that was a 10-year shift. I didn't know anything about creativity for 10 years. I was very good at the business.
See,
so
that's so important. You say something that it truly fascinated me. And maybe if you can pull the microphone a little bit closer, but you say a 10-year shift. It's so fascinating because I think like people think that like, the major shift in life sometimes might happen like overnight, sometimes they happen like in the span of a week, but a 10-year shift.
That's nothing.
It's crazy, right? Like, I'm actually envisioning someone shifting like a gear stick and doing it like gradually for 10 years.
It's not crazy for me. I've been in my job for over 20 years, Simone. I don't move job. I've had the same job for 20 years. I'm going to have the same job for 20 more years. So I don't know. Overnight isn't a thing for me. I think about things that will take 3 years, things that will take 5 years, 10 years.
That's beautiful.
I'm a glacier, a tortoise, right? And that's the sort of the pace that I move. And, think slow and steady and,
I like that.
Wins the race.
That's a great answer, man. I like that. See, I like those bits because they reveal something of you that I didn't know.
Sure.
I'm a glacier.
I'm a glacier. I'm a tortoise.
Love it. Second question, man. Okay, so polluting the ocean turned beauty into a nightmare. It takes like, away one of the wonders of our universe and it turned into like what we call like commercial dumpster. Now, ideologically, it's like staining the purity of life with a brush of a capitalistic like society. It reminds me actually, even though it's not directly connected, of the word of one of my favorite writers, David Foster Wallace.
Rest in peace.
Regarding like, advertising pollution. And he say, how can even the idea of rebellion against like corporate culture stay meaningful when Chrysler advertised truck by invoking like the Dodge Rebellion? How do you read that? How do you recover from that? So I'm here and I'm asking you a simple question. How do you react to corporate pollution?
I don't think that's a thing. It's subjective. I think advertising is beautiful. I grew up around it.
Right.
It sort of represents much more for me. I love ads.
Right.
I like watching them. I subject myself to them. I accept all cookies.
Right.
I want people to know my data and advertise towards me in a better way.
But
I like that.
Look into the word rebellion. It's such a pure word. But when it gets trivialized by, if I say Dodge Rebellion, don't you think that some sort of way you are polluting the word? You don't think so?
You know what? Before there was advertising, I'm sure there were other ways to pollute things that were pure.
Right.
We're humans, and we take things
we pollute
them, and we make light of them. Like that's been the case.
Right.
That's never going to change. I have a much more lighthearted attitude about it. If you want to sum it up in 3 words, nothing is sacred, and I'm not the first person to say that. Nothing is sacred, and like advertising is proof of that. That's a
good answer. I mean, I disagree with that.
Sure,
but of course.
I saw a pop-up blocker in outdoor. It was like for augmented reality glasses, which will be popular, where it turns all advertising into some no ad. It's just like a circle with a cross through it. The circle with a cross through it is far uglier than any advertising.
Absolutely. No, look, when I talk about pollution, for me, it's like, first of all, I'm a guy I truly love advertising. And that's the only job I had in my life. I only worked in advertising. I didn't do anything else because that's what I wanted to do. I don't fall in that category of people or creative that say, I'm here because I want to do something else. No, I'm here because I want to do advertising. But there is certain kind of aspect of advertising that pollutes culture that I don't like. So when you see a commercial that is whose voiceover is a poem and is completely ripped off and put into a brand, that to me is polluting. When you have an idea that is a true rip-off of a performance artist
Yes.
That's polluting. So there is a lot of case where advertising, I think, should cross a line. It should stop polluting and stay in their own lane or create their own ideas. There is too much borrow. There is too much borrow and not enough like creativity genuine. And that's where I think like the polluting come in place, you know. And I think that's, maybe nothing is sacred, but at the same times, you must have some kind of pillars that you say, you know what, you don't cross the line on this.
I will draw a line.
Yeah.
I'll draw a line with cultural appropriation. If you want to know where my line is, you know, I've become a lot smarter in the last 2 years. I think many people have, and I think there are many advertising decisions from 3 years ago that I would never make. Today. So sure, some things are sacred, and so that's, if you want to know where my line is, I'll call it that.
That's awesome. I always love to know like people's line where it likes in the sand. Third question. Okay, so as a part of the National Geographic photo competition, there is an image titled David and Goliath that took the heart of a million people. The picture was taken in 2012 by Octavio Aburto. And I think if you Google, you can find this picture, or maybe you know already. During a diving session with a large group of like people, he's like surrounded by fish. And these fish, like they're called like big eye fish, are some of the oddest looking fish that you can find in the ocean. They have like these gigantic eyes, and like, you know, their jaw is like oblique, like they're very like strange looking. Now in the picture, thousands of big eye fish swim around Octavio. And they create this amazing portrait of this little human surrounded by, like, you know, a Goliath of fish. Now, you work in the health category. I have mad respect for the health category. And I do believe that when it comes to creative assignments, you, your team, your co-workers are probably some of the toughest creative assignments in the industry. Looking back, what was the toughest battle that you had to fight regarding a creative assignment that was really make you feel like Octavio surrounded by the gigantic fish?
I think you're talking really about any truly special piece of work is probably going to have an Octavio story, because there's going to be just a lot of failure built into it. You know, I think one of our sort of more famous efforts is our Sick Beats project. And, you know, that's a project that took 5 years to bring to the stage that it's at now. And that's 5 years of failure, of partnerships falling through, of a clinical trial falling through, of the pandemic totally canceling the project completely, resuscitating it. And, you know, I think that comes back to being a glacier, right? You know, most people, they're only at an agency for 3 years or 4 years. So the idea of a 5-year project is inconceivable to them. But, you know, knowing that I'm going to be here for another 20 or 30, right? We could say, hey, something. We have an idea that the technology doesn't exist yet, but in a couple of years it will. So we'll work on it in the background until then. So I think the Sick Beats project is one that absolutely was completely off the table many times. And, you know, and then once it actually came to fruition, it was like 4 months of sprinting and working with Wooger and working with this company and developing this new technology, getting it to families, having them film themselves during the pandemic, and then, you know, gaining fame through it, attracting investor attention, and now developing the product for FDA approval. So yeah, like anything that you're truly passionate about and that is ambitious, it's going to be a Goliath.
I mean, it's very interesting because I had the luck to freelance for you and for your agency, like, you know, as you remember. I think that's and not because you are in front of me, but like the work that you guys do, it's extremely beautiful. Like, you know, some of the work is extremely smart. But I do remember you are talking to an hypochondria, I'm truly hypochondriac. Like, my father was a doctor. I was telling you before offline, and like, I was a doctor and a chemistry teacher. And I developed like hypochondria very early in life. I think I was 15 after my anorexia. I was anorexic for a couple of years and then like developed hypochondriac. So I was always very careful when I was approached by a pharma agency, because it really messed up with my mind. And I remember like getting a couple of assignments from you guys, not from you personally, but from your team, and working on this. So one in particular, I think it was about oncology. It really messed up with my mind, and I felt like Octavio surrounded by big fish, and I was like, I had a couple of days very rough. I was like, I don't know if I can make this, because it was really like, interjected with my feelings. I think that is very rare that when you work in advertising and it's not that kind of like, topic, in a different kind of like, a car, it doesn't interject with your feelings. Like, a potato chips doesn't interject with your feelings.
No.
But oncology for kids, it does. It really messes up. And I think you have to have a stability that has no comparison like in any other category of advertising. So maybe that's a long way.
The constitution for
Absolutely.
it. We were filming, Abby, the girl in the Sick Beats video, and she said, I need to take a break. I need to, my G-tube is twisted, because she's got a feeding tube that goes through her skin into her stomach because she can't retain nutrients and she has to pack it in. And, and it just sort of, hit me. It sort of hit us. Oh, and she also said the vest is great because it doesn't hit her G-tube. And we were all just like, oh my God. And it just hit us that like, you're talking to somebody who has a shortened life expectancy, who has to go through a crazy rigmarole every day, whose family has been affected with this 24 hours a day, since her birth, and it's going to be with her for the rest of her life. So, it does take a certain constitution to work in this space.
Here's another question for you. Sailors are great storytellers. My grandfather was a sailor, actually.
I'm from a sailing family as well. I am.
When you live in the same confined space with other people for an extensive amount of time, out in the open water, sharing stories that you have in your mind, it's storytelling come very natural. Now, according to Kurt Vonnegut, I don't know if I pronounce his name correctly.
Perfect.
Humankind lives in a psychical and perennial recounting of three types of stories. Now, the first one is called The Man in a Hole. And it's the typical story of falling and getting up, and then eventually succeeding. The second one is called Boy Meet Girl. And I think we're all familiar with that. It's a love story, typical love story. The third one, though, is a fairy tale. And it begins on a bad note and it ends on a very good note. Now, the trajectory from sadness to happiness is what makes the fairy tale part of the story. If you were to pick one of these categories, Man in the Hole, Boy Meet Girl, or fairy tale, what would be your category for storytelling?
Man in a Hole.
Man in a Hole.
Man in a Hole. I will first say I'm from a sailing family as well, and we've spent a lot of time. Large family, 7 children.
That's a lot.
2 parents, some grandparents, all on a boat for 2 weeks, sailing to Maine.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of confined spaces.
Yeah,
so,
a lot of stories.
Yes, a lot of stories. Man in a Hole, by choice. Right. I'm not a person who's in a hole. Right. I come from great privilege. I come from an advertising family. I went for my first job interview. They said, Hawkey, when can you start? Can we get some of that penny Hawkey flavor? So I will acknowledge I come from great privilege. And, but my mentality is probably, Seabiscuit the horse. Mm-hmm. Seabiscuit only ran at his or her best when there was another horse next to him or her, and it's propelled and motivated by competition,
Right.
by adversity.
Right.
If you just have a big open track, there's nothing to drive you forward. So I am motivated by competition, by adversity, by being in a hole. So I think I like to put myself in a hole and keep myself in a metaphorical hole,
Right.
because otherwise there's really nothing to strive towards. You know,
When was the last time you fell?
last time I mean, in a big way.
I know that we say we fell all the time, but literally tell me the last time you truly fell.
I mean, I can't tell you the last time, but I could tell you, a time. 15 years ago, my career almost went off track because I got into my own head about, who I am, where I'm at, how my career is going, who I am compared to other people. And I developed crazy anxiety. Like, a clinic, if we're going to be sharing our mental illnesses.
Absolutely.
That, a crippling anxiety where, I couldn't even go to work, let alone, make a presentation. And I was the presenter.
What level of where you, because this is so interesting for like a young creative, what level of where you
I was
already
like
a creative director?
I was like a CD.
You were a CD.
A CD,
Okay.
And 30 years old, CD.
Right.
But my meteoric pace and the thing I was going to do was maybe compromised, and I didn't, it just really got in my head. And, mental health it will throw
Absolutely.
a career off track. And, with the help of medication, Lexapro, it's great stuff. I, to this day, can, be a confident advertising man. But yeah, absolutely. I think mental health is
Right.
more ever present and more talked about today.
Absolutely. I mean, I was talking to my wife like a couple of days ago about sometimes I think we as a creative, like in the advertising, even though we are trying to solve business problem, at least personally, I work a lot with my feelings. There is a lot of my feelings that goes into not just the work, but even the way I present the work. The state of mind and the state of heart of that particular day bleed over every presentation, every deck I write, so it's if that day I'm hangry, you probably see in my presentation, doesn't mean that I swear or doesn't mean that but there is a certain age to it. If that day I'm extremely happy, you can feel it. So I think that mental health is so important, and particularly for us that work in the advertising industry, because we work in a highly subjective industry where I can come in and tell you that, Tim, the idea that you just came out,
no good.
I just don't like it. And you say, no, I like it. I know.
And
but
you know what that sounds like?
taste.
I don't like you.
Exactly. It sounds like
I
that.
don't like your idea. It may as
You
well
don't like
be.
me.
I don't like you. I don't like your brain, and I don't like the way that you
Absolutely.
think, and I don't like your creativity.
Yes.
And
so
that's very.
It's very hard. It's very hard to take it. And I think that there is a level of rejection that other professionals don't go through. For instance, I have a brother. He's a mechanical engineer, and he's in charge of the earth signaling. When you build a train, you need the train goes to the signaling. He's in charge of that. There is a systematic process to do that job, right? And at any point in the process, it's never going to be someone that say, no, you're not going to do it like this. This is not good. No, there is not good. There is such a thing as good and bad.
That's right or wrong.
There is no such a thing. It is like this. You study to do it like this. That's how it's done. It's not subjective, it's objective. So it doesn't face the level of rejection that you point so fairly, say when you don't like my idea, you probably don't like me because they're coming from me.
Mm-hmm.
They're coming from my head.
It's part of me.
It's part of me. So yeah, that's I feel you on that. And I think that it's such an important topic that it's never really get talked about enough, I think, Great answer, man. So the very first journey made by a ship is called Maiden Voyage. This term was first like recorded in 1901, but the use of the word maiden traces back in the 1500. Now, this shows how important it is to define this very first time you cross the ocean. So a maiden voyage is the very first time you cross the ocean. That's your maiden voyage. My maiden voyage was 2006. It was the first time that TBWA New York City sponsored me with a one visa. And so like, come to New York. That was my maiden voyage, right? Normally when you do this maiden voyage, you always like got like a very solid lesson that you learn or you remember. You have been in pharma for a long time, probably your maiden voyage like happened there, but what was the biggest lesson you got from pharma?
I'll give you a maiden voyage story and the lesson. So I'll go, 20 years into my career. I'll go 2015. So as I said, I started as a more technical person and like slowly learned about creativity, on the job, which is not your typical path. Now, probably about 10, 11 years ago, I was running Area23. We wanted to be creative. We became somewhat creative, and we thought we were great. We were like, dominating the American pharmaceutical circuit. And, we thought we had it made. And at that same time, Cannes Lions, it opened up the Lions Health. And Carter Murray, who was the CEO of FCB at the time, said, hey, you're all, going to Cannes. You're going to show your work. I'm going to show you how it's done. And I'll be honest, I knew I had heard of Cannes. I had never paid attention to it. I didn't really know what was going on there at all. So we went to Cannes. We entered all of our work. We were strutting around like, this is going to be great. We're going to get all these Lions Healths. And we got our asses handed to us, and we were just sent back to the U.S.
Right.
Just completely, like with our mouths open, like what happened? I guess our work isn't very good at all. Right. And, I think a lot of people in pharma at the time, they said, foul. There are regulations, and the U.S. has harsher regulations. And I didn't. I said, our work really mustn't be very good at all. Our work must be very bad. And I know that's very black and white, but that's a man in a hole. You got to you take your situation and say, okay, now where's my hole? Our work is very bad. How can we make our work very good? And what could we do over the next 5 years to make our work very good? And so we set a plan, put a plan in place. We said this is something that we're going to achieve, and you work hard against it. So I think that was an important literal transatlantic voyage that resulted in a very big lesson that absolutely changed the course of my creative career and gave me a very different benchmark for creativity, which I became familiar with. I tried very hard to copy at first, and and I think we now enjoy nice success at Cannes.
Interesting, because I penned down, I think it was the 6th question for you, and this 6th question, I'm just going to tell, but I don't expect an answer because you already gave me the answer, because if there is one thing that I take away from this interview with you is timing. I think your timing is different from everybody's timing in advertising.
Glacial pace.
The glacier pace. Now, I'll tell you this story that it was included in my 6th question. It was this. Now, everybody watched The Joker, right? Now, there is a funny thing about that movie. If you watch that movie at a certain speed, you notice normal things. If you watch it at a different speed, if you alterate the speed a little bit, there are clues drop in the frame that you don't notice at the normal speed.
It's exciting.
So now, and the question was when was there a time in your life when during a creative assignment you dial up on the speed and slow down?
I appreciate you actually helping me with the answer on that one, because it's a hard question. But I will.
But you already gave me.
But I'm going to take the gift that you've given me and just talk about, having a 20-year goal and having a 30-year goal. And, as strange as that might be to people. And, I mean, God, we executed and created a campaign this summer that honestly I had in my pocket for 15 years or more. It's a sticky note or a virtual sticky note.
Sticky note.
Can we do this? No, the technology isn't available. 5 years later, oh, no, this isn't right. And then last year, oh, well, this technology is now available on iPhones.
I wish you turned on the camera 15 years ago, start building a case study of 15 years. That would be awesome.
Well, that's assuming that you know how this is going to end, but you don't. You don't know where things are going to end. It might end up being the most boring film in the world.
It's like the Steve Jobs ultimate definition, right? You can't connect the dots backwards. You can you can connect the backwards.
Not backwards. Only backwards.
Yeah, only backwards. So it's that's super interesting. Look, we're almost done with our voyage, and I'm gonna throw at you a question that is related to this amazing setup that London International Awards gave us. You're here judging the pharma category, and you are the president of your jury, so number one of the ocean here. If there is one thing that you had to take away, actually two things that you had to take away from this week, and when you fly back, I give you two options. You have to put one in your carry-on and one in your luggage. Which one you put in your carry-on? Which one you put in your luggage?
So great. I only do carry-on, and it's two pieces. So I've never checked baggage, and but I do have two pieces, and one goes up and one stays down. So I'll use those two options. I'll take away some literal money, which because I got here on my first night. And I put $100 on 23, Area 23, and it hit. And I've never been to
That's a lucky number, man.
I've never been to a roulette table in my life. I had to ask him. I was like, hey, how do I do this? And where I put it somewhere, they said, don't touch it. So it hit $3,500, and won a lot more. So yeah, I'll bring some cash in my my backpack, and then in my luggage up above. I have not judged Leah before, so I will take away from this, one, it's a great experience for judges. This is a great setting. This hotel is amazing, and it creates a very joyous atmosphere. And I think when you compare it to other shows and other festivals, some of them can take themselves very seriously. Some of them are all about a certain aspect. And I think, the beauty of Leah, I'll take away one word, which is it's meant to be fun.
Where do you put this word? Up?
Fun. Fun. I'll put this in my luggage. In
your luggage.
In my equivalent of my checked luggage.
Okay.
The word is fun. And some juries, they fight and they fight about stuff. But I settle my argument in my jury just by saying, guys, we're here to have fun. The work is fun. Let's celebrate creativity. The outcome of this isn't going to change the world, and if we're not going to agree, then each vote with your individual conscience.
Absolutely.
And and I think Barbara would agree. Advertising is supposed to be fun, and Leah is supposed to be fun. So that's what I'll take away.
Hey, Tim, thank you so much for letting me cross your ocean. It was an amazing adventure, and I wish you all the best and travel safe back to New York.
Thank you, Simone.
Thank you so much. No, that's it, right? You cool?
All right.
Cool, amen.